As we move into the next unit, what we're going to focus on first is respiratory physiology. I would say for most students this is a relatively novel topic. Not a lot of students are familiar with respiratory physiology, and some of it isn't necessarily things that they use daily or actually monitor when they exercise. So it may be a little bit difficult. We're going to work through it. The book has been a great resource. I really encourage you to use it. It's got some really good information on the respiratory physiology section, and then hopefully these videos, PowerPoints, and then I'll add some videos in as well that should help you. So if we jump into the pulmonary system. So the pulmonary system, again, just another word for the respiratory system. Its function is to simply allow for gas exchange to occur between the external environment and the body. Right? As we learned in metabolism, this is the idea of replacing O2 or replenishing oxygen in the venous system and then removing carbon dioxide waste from blood. We'll also talk about its major role in acid-base balance during exercise as part of this, but I don't want to stray too far. So I'll make the distinction, the book points this out as well, that there's two types of respiration. So far we've talked about cellular respiration or mitochondrial respiration, and this is the utilization of oxygen and the carbon dioxide production by tissues, and we can add to that the generation of ATP. Right? So we are consuming oxygen, producing CO2, and we would term this cellular respiration. What we're going to focus on today, though, is pulmonary respiration. This idea is that there is a ventilation or breathing and the exchange of gases that takes place in the lungs. So two properties that go into pulmonary respiration are both ventilation and diffusion. We can define ventilation as the mechanical process of moving air into and out of the lungs. Right? So breathing. Right? Diffusion is more of a physics principle and is the idea of the random movement of molecules from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So as we'll see, oxygen moves from the lungs into the venous system, which is low on oxygen, to replenish that store, and carbon dioxide is going to move from the blood that's being produced from cellular respiration and then be exchanged back and then breathed out. So with that, the first thing that we'll need to do is to look at the structure and function of the pulmonary system. To do that, I think, as usual, a video with kind of moving parts does a much better job of me explaining definitions. So we'll play that and then we'll come back and hit some of the highlights.
The respiratory system moves air through the nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, and bronchus to the alveoli where the gas exchange between oxygen and carbon dioxide occurs. Nares are the openings to the nose. The nasal cavity is lined with cilia, mucous membranes, and blood capillaries. The air is filtered by cilia, moistened by mucous membranes, and warmed by the blood. Air moves into the pharynx or throat, the common passageway for food and air. Air continues on to the larynx. The epiglottis, a flap of tissue in front of the larynx, closes off the larynx when swallowing to prevent food from entering. The larynx or voice box contains the vocal folds. The trachea or windpipe connects the larynx to the bronchial tree. The cartilage rings of the trachea prevent the trachea from collapsing. Lungs are spongy tissue with alveoli and blood capillaries. Breathing occurs because of the expansion and contraction of the lungs. The bronchi carrying the air subdivide into smaller branches called bronchioles. At the end of each bronchiole are the alveolar sacs. The alveolar sacs are surrounded by blood capillaries and contain millions of single-layer alveoli cells where the gas exchange takes place. Oxygenated air goes from the nose to the pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchus, and alveoli. By the process of diffusion, oxygen in the air moves from the alveoli to the capillaries. Carbon dioxide moves from the capillaries to the alveoli and is exhaled. This process is called respiration.
So let's go over some of the highlights from that video. Again, looking here, we can see the anatomy from that video. Air must come in through the nose, nasal cavities, down through the pharynx and larynx, and then ultimately into the trachea, where it then enters into the bronchus or bronchial tree, ultimately to the lungs and into the alveoli, which is a site of gas exchange. We can separate the structure and functions into two zones. First, the conducting zone. The conducting zone main purpose is to filter warm and humidified air, and you'll see it's made up of the trachea, the primary bronchus, which split into the left and right lungs, and then the bronchial tree, which looks very similar to a tree, going from very large diameter bronchi to very small diameter, and all ending in what are termed terminal bronchioles. So in this area, no gas exchange place. It's just the mechanism by which we deliver oxygen into the respiratory zone. The respiratory zone consists of terminal bronchiole and alveolus, which is singular or plural alveoli. And this is where gas exchange is going to take place. So again, if we can take a look and break this down even further, the conducting zone, again, primary factors are to humidify, warm, and filter air. And you'll see the number of tubes or branches get progressively larger. So we have one trachea coming in, splitting into the left and right lung via the bronchi, which then split and split and split and split until we get bronchioles, which are all these levels here, ultimately ending in a very large number of terminal bronchioles that then are there to increase surface area. The respiratory zone is gas exchange between air and blood. Again, this can consist of respiratory bronchioles and then alveoli, which are alveolar ducts and sacs. The respiratory bronchioles are added to this respiratory zone primarily because they have a small number, and it's depicted here in these pictures, of alveoli in them so that they can actually conduct gas exchange. So if we look at the where gas exchange takes place, this is the zoomed in version of a single alveolus here. It's got several properties. One, all this branching and splitting and then dividing into these tiny little sacs allow us to have a huge surface area. So our lungs consist of about 30 million alveoli, which gives us the equivalent surface area roughly equal to a tennis court of which to have gas exchange take place. So as you can imagine, this is a large surface area, so we can get a lot of gas exchange really rapidly. Another benefit of the this alveoli structure is that the alveolar wall is really thin, 1 to 2 cells thick at most. Right? So that means that the blood gas barrier is very small. There's a very small window here between the capillary that you can see here and the cell. It just has to cross essentially a 1 cell difference. You can see if you compare the size of the red blood cell there, again, very small. So gas exchange, gas doesn't have to go very far in order to have that happen. So because of these tiny thin walls, alveoli are very fragile. Right? So in order to protect against that, we have a surfactant that's released by type 2 alveolar cells. Right? These increase surface tension and prevent collapse of the alveoli and allow gas exchange to continue to happen. If you didn't have this surfactant, alveoli would collapse on itself and would not be able to have any type of gas exchange. Last but not least, as we talk about the structure of the lungs and how gas exchange is going to take place, we need to introduce the idea of pleura. The lung has a double-layered membrane around each lung. These are termed pleura. These are fluid-filled sacs that protect against friction against the two membranes. We'll see we have two pleura. First is the parietal pleura. This is on the outside. It lines the thoracic walls and the diaphragm, And then we have the visceral pleura. This is important because it adheres to the outer surface of the lung. So as you can see, these two create what's known as an intrapleural space, seen here in white. Right? The intrapleural space is extremely important for gas exchange because it is below atmospheric pressure and becomes even lower during inspiration. What this does is it allows the pressure on the outside to keep the lungs inflated and prevent the lungs from deflating. We'll have more on that in the future, but just wanted to make sure you guys see the definition of pleura, see how they line up. So again, visceral pleura lines the outer surface of the lung, and the parietal pleura lines the thoracic cavity and the diaphragm in order to make this intrapleural cavity. So in summary, the primary function of the pulmonary system is going to be provide a means of gas exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the environment and the body. It's also going to play an important role in the regulation of acid-base balance. And ultimately, it consists of a group of passages that filter air, that warm it and humidify it, going from a large structure in the trachea into this huge surface area the size of a tennis court in the alveoli, where gas exchange occurs. In the next video, we're going to actually talk about inspiration and expiration and how the lungs are able to cause an increase airflow into the lungs, and the diaphragm, which is a particularly important muscle for me, as I spent a really long time researching it, spent 4 years at the University of Florida working on diaphragm and breathing mechanics. So with that, we'll stop here and then we'll continue in the next video.